This is the Nike Invincible and the Nike Vomero 16. Two shoes featuring Nike's Zoom X foam in comfy grand touring packages. One shoe pushes Nike boldly forward, while the other is a refreshing blast from Nike's storied past. But which is the better shoe? It's time to lace them up and take them for a run. .67 miles, 8 minutes, 52 seconds per mile, 139 beats per minute today. Going for a nice easy run in the Nike Vomero 16 and going for a very similar run last Friday in the Nike Zoom X Invincible so that I can compare these two shoes head to head. But before I give you my thoughts on these two shoes, I do want to go over some disclosures. The Nike Zoom X Invincible is a pair of shoes that was sent to me for the purpose of review by Roadrunner Sports. The Vomero 16 is a pair of shoes that I purchased myself. However, in either event, no one's paying me to make this video or to use either of these two shoes or to put them in a video, and no one's gonna get a chance to preview any of my footage or my thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. So with that disclosure out of the way, let's talk about the Nike Zoom X Invincible versus the Nike Vomero 16. Now, both of these shoes have Nike's Zoom X foam, but let's talk about the specs individually because there's quite a bit of difference in these two shoes. First, let's talk about the Zoom X Invincible. In this shoe, we've got 36.6 millimeters of stack height in the heel with a 9 millimeter drop, giving us 27.6 millimeters of stack height in the forefoot. And in that stack height is nothing but Nike's Zoom X foam. We've been seeing it in all sorts of speed shoes, super shoes, workout shoes, but now we're starting to get it in the shoes that are meant for your everyday runs and in shoes where longevity and durability is something that we are going to take into consideration. On the outsole, we have nearly full coverage rubber, and this rubber has been holding up really well. I have well over 100 miles into this shoe and it still looks pretty fresh. So it's holding up to the road miles much better than I had anticipated. On the upper, we have what Nike is calling a knit upper, although it doesn't really feel like a knit to me. It feels much less comfortable than knit is if you've run in, say, the Epic React, or if you run in the Zoom Fly knit or the Vaporfly 4% Fly knit. Those Fly knit shoes were so much more comfortable than this upper. I think it's technically a knit material, but I don't know if it's a knit material on top of some substrate type of material that's giving it more kind of structure to the upper, but it's not quite as breathable and it's definitely not as comfortable as some of the other premium knits have been. We have a moderate amount of padding on the tongue. It actually ends up being quite warm for a tongue. And then there's even more of this foam and padding as you get around to the heel collar. In the heel, there's quite a bit of kind of stability and motion control back here. There's a large heel clip that digs in pretty far past the ball of the heel towards the midfoot. And that also then protrudes up into a plastic structure that gives a lot of stability and rigidity to this heel cup. All told, all this technology and all this stuff in here comes in at a weight of 9.8 ounces and 277 grams. Now let's move on to the Vomero 16. The Vomero 16 also has Zoom X foam in it, but it's not a full Zoom X midsole. In fact, there's a lot of things going in this midsole. The Zoom X is more of like a Zoom X core that kind of sits inside the shoe, kind of is inlaid towards the center of the shoe, and the ends at a Zoom Air pocket that's in the forefoot. That Zoom Air pocket, I think, is the same or very similar to the Zoom Air pocket we're seeing in the Pegasus 37 and the Pegasus 38. It's a little bit bigger than the traditional Zoom Air pockets that we've seen in the past, but that's what's in the forefoot here. And surrounding all that, or carrying all that, is a carrier foam, Nike's SR02 foam, which to me feels a lot like Cushlon, which is the carrier foam that used to be in the earlier versions of the Pegasus. The result of all these three things together is giving us a stack height of 29.5 millimeters in the heel, with a 10 millimeter drop giving us 19.5 millimeters of stack height in the forefoot. On the outsole, we have full rubber coverage outsole in a beautiful gum color. Moving to the upper, it's a mesh upper, but this mesh upper is very, very nice. very breathable, some speed holes right over the toes, which help make the shoe go faster and are very comfortable. Moving back, there's a lot more structure and kind of like this saddle part. There are cables or a fly wire system that is on the side of the shoe, that so when you're cinching the laces down, you're not simply just tightening the shoes at the top, you're actually pulling the sides of the shoe in together to really lock down that midfoot. To protect your foot from all that pressure though is a very heavily padded tongue. This is probably the puffiest, most padded tongue that I've seen pretty much on any shoe ever. It's comically big, but that's what they've done here. It's very hot and it soaks up a lot of sweat. Moving on back, the comfort continues with a lot of plush cushion that's all around the parts of the shoe that are going to touch your heel, even wrapping around towards the outside of the shoe to kind of further emphasize visually just how much padding there is in here. And a lot of this foam is covering up what is otherwise a very built up, very solid heel structure. So some similarities between the two shoes here, where there's just a lot of armor that is protecting the heel and preventing it from moving around too much. All put together, this shoe comes in at a very similar weight to the Nike Zoom X Invincible, although this comes in a little bit heavier at a weight that I measured for my US size 9 at 10.0 ounces or 286 grams. So now that we've got all those specs laid out and on the table, let's talk about how these two shoes are to run in. Let's stick with the Vomero 16 first. Now, the Vomero has been kind of a weird shoe for me. I'm having a hard time understanding. I've had a hard time understanding it, at least in terms of what it is and what Nike really is trying to accomplish with it. For the longest time, I've thought that it is Nike's attempt at a max cushion shoe, a genre of shoe that I think Nike has always kind of struggled with. But when you look at kind of like the stack height and the heel drop, and if you look at it kind of, I guess from like the puffiness down, if you don't mind the puffiness, if you look at it from like here down, it seems like a really good daily trainer. It's got a Cushlon type foam, which I really enjoyed from older Pegasus. It has Zoom Air in the forefoot, which I also really enjoyed from prior versions or older versions of the Pegasus. And it's got that 10 millimeter drop, which I have become very familiar with Nike shoes, and a fit that even for Nike is snug, but very, very comfortable. So it's a lot more forgiving than most Nike running shoes are. And so I feel like this reminds me of the Pegasus shoes that I fell in love with half a decade ago, but it's doing it with some updated materials. It's got that Zoom X core. It's got that updated Zoom Air pocket. And those things are all working in a way that reminds me of those initial shoes that I loved. And I've been absolutely loving running in this shoe. I've only had it for a couple of weeks now, but every run that I've had it on, I've really enjoyed running in it. It just feels like a really great daily trainer should. It has that signature Pegasus-ness that I've come to know in the Pegasus line, but it's doing it in kind of this Vomero package. So it's got lots of puffiness up in the tongue. It's got lots of puffiness up in the heel cup, and it's making it a little bit heavier than I would like for, say, a Pegasus. But for me, the way that this Vomero is turning out is it's turning into kind of like a Pegasus Plus or a Pegasus Plush. It's kind of like a Goldilocks shoe where it's not too soft, it's not too firm, it's not too much of a speed shoe, but it's not a max cushion shoe either. It's kind of just right. It's kind of like a textbook definition of what I think a daily trainer should be. And it's really what I hope that the Pegasus can return to being, hopefully in the Peg 39 and future iterations of that shoe. Now let's talk about what it's like to run in the Nike Zoom X Invincible. The Nike Zoom X Invincible is very different. It's unlike any shoe that I've ever run in before, and that's likely because of all this Zoom X foam. And I will say that this is a very good shoe to run in, and I've been having so much fun running in it. The thing is, it's a very specific or a very particular shoe. For me, I like to land a little bit more forefoot, but this shoe really rewards you if you're landing a little bit more in the midfoot. So it doesn't like the forefoot strike quite as much. It wants you to land squarely on the midfoot, and then it bounces you forward. So there's a little bit of a rocker built into this shoe, but I don't ever feel like I'm really using it because I just feel like I bounce and it moves me forward in a very specific way. Like the bounce is very calculated in this shoe. And so when you are a forefoot striker, or if you are a heel foot striker, I feel like it's constantly nudging you and reminding you you're not doing it right, you're not doing it right, until it makes you run in the way that it wants to run. Now, if you don't want to run that way, then this is going to be a shoe that I don't think you'll like. And I think that's why this shoe has been pretty polarizing for a lot of people. And at first, it really surprised me that this shoe didn't become more popular in terms of which feels easier on the body. I think it's the Nike Zoom X Invincible. In terms of which one do I think is it easier to run very long distances, I think it's the Nike Zoom X Invincible, but it's doing it in a way that is not normal, that is not textbook. I'm not saying that it's wrong, but for some people, it's going to be off-putting. Now, I will say that neither of these shoes is a speed day shoe. I think both of these shoes, not only given the weight, but given all like the armor and all the puffiness and the cushioning that's on here, they're not intended to be the shoes that you also take for your hardest workout. Maybe you could take them for a long, slow distance type of run, but I really wouldn't want to take it for something where I'm trying to get to threshold pace, to 10K pace, 5K pace, or faster than that in a workout. I just feel like some of like the extra stuff that's built in there for comfort is going to start getting in the way. And it's going to just start to feel a little bit heavy and cumbersome. And especially the Zoom X Invincible. It just likes to do what it likes to do, and it doesn't want to be pushed to do really much else, at least in my experience. So neither of these shoes really wins in that category. Going back to the uppers and the comforts and the puffiness and all that stuff, I think that the Vomero 16 is a much more comfortable shoe in terms of the upper. Even though this isn't a knit material, and I am a sucker for knit material, I love knit uppers, I think that the mesh and what they're doing with it is really nice, and it's very soft, very stretchy. I just wish though that they could have carried some of this comfort and breathability further back into the shoe so that it just wasn't so much of a sweat magnet and so much of wearing, it feels like I'm just wearing like a puffy vest in the middle of the summer when I got all this kind of stuff going on in the shoe. But other than that, I feel like the shoe is much more comfortable in the upper in the Vomero 16 than it is in the Zoom X Invincible. In terms of the outsole, comparing those two, I feel like the tread pattern and the rubber compound they're using on the Vomero 16 is stuff that I'm very familiar with, and I don't have any doubts that I'm going to enjoy being able to run in a variety of surfaces. And I'm thinking mainly for those of you who are thinking about using the shoe for a lot of cross-country type of training, where you're going to be on grass a lot, maybe running up and down hills, maybe some dirt paths, that kind of terrain. I think that this shoe is going to be fine in the situations where maybe you could use a trail shoe, but maybe you don't really need to use one. I think that the Vomero 16 is going to be able to handle all of that really well. The Nike Zoom X Invincible doesn't look like the most confidence-inspiring shoe when it comes to a varied terrain. And maybe on like a grassy course, I'm not sure that I would still feel good about running in this shoe, even though I have a lot of experience in it. There's just something about it, the lugs just aren't deep enough. I just worry that this would get gunked up really fast if you're getting into some softer surfaces and really trying to move. On the other hand, I ran in this shoe in literal sub-zero temperatures here in Chicago on packed snow and ice, and I did just fine in those conditions as well. So like it does surprisingly well, but I also will give the slight edge on the outsole performance to the Vomero 16. So ultimately, it's really hard for me to kind of pick a best shoe. And I've made kind of like a resolution to always pick a winner no matter what, whenever I do a battle video. And so I will pick a winner. But I will say though, the way that I would break it down is if you are nostalgic for what Nike running shoes used to be, but want it with some updated technology, the Vomero 16 is definitely a shoe that you should look at. If you are looking for the latest and greatest and what's new from Nike, the Zoom X Invincible is the one that you should look at. But for me, the one that I'm gonna pick is gonna be the Vomero 16. The Invincible might be the better shoe, like ounce for ounce, pound for pound, but I do have that nostalgia for some of Nike's older running shoes. I did fall in love with Nike running back at the Pegasus 32, and this reminds me a lot of that shoe. And so maybe that's what's going on here, and maybe that's what's kind of coloring my decision, but that's the one that I'm gonna pick as the better shoe between the Zoom X Invincible and the Vomero 16. Let me know in the comments if you disagree. I'd love to hear about it, or better yet, feel free to stop by the live stream that I do Monday through Friday right here on YouTube, and I'd love to talk to you guys in the chat. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?